the day 3, when the instructions say factor completely, then what we're looking to do is combine all of the techniques we've talked about all week long. Now, the only thing that we talked about as far as a greatest common factor was when that x squared term was negative. Today, we're going to look for a greatest common factor before we begin our factoring process. So if you can divide all of the terms in your polynomial by the same number, you will factor out that number first. Then from there, you're going to look to see what remains. If there's only 2 terms, then I would be looking to see, do I have the difference of 2 squares? Or if it's a trinomial, is it actually a perfect square trinomial that when you factor it, it becomes a binomial squared? Or is it a simple trinomial where the number in front of x squared is a 1? Or the more challenging, when this a value here in front of x squared is going to be a number that's not equal to 1. If that's the case, then you'll factor it by turning it into the 4 terms and factor by grouping. So these are just suggested steps that you can follow. You may not necessarily do every single one of the steps. It all depends on each individual problem. So then now that we've seen the steps to follow, all we're going to do is examples. Now, when you're doing a factoring question like this, they're not going to say, oh, look for a GCF. It's got a GCF, pull it out. It's just going to say factor completely. This is where you need to review all the steps and think, okay, let me look at these 3 numbers. Can I divide them all by the same number? No, I cannot. So this was the nice, easy trinomial that we covered on day 1. So all we're doing here is looking for the factors of this C term. So 2 numbers, the factors of 6, that will sum to the middle. So when the number in front of x squared is a 1, you don't have to do the factor by grouping. You can, but it's a lot easier just to list the factors of 6 and then find the ones, and they both have to be the same sign, and they're both going to have the sign of the middle. So if I do -1 plus -6, this gives me -7. That pair of factors doesn't work. But if I do -2 and -3, and then if I add them to get the sum, that gives me what I need. And when it's the easy trinomial, you just take those 2 factors and you put them right into the binomial. So it's x minus 2, x minus 3. This is just a review of day 1. This next one was just day 2. There are not any numbers that I can divide all 3 by, so no GCF here. So I'm going to go right into my factor by grouping. So I'm going to multiply the beginning and the end. This gives me -30x squared. So I'm looking for these factors of this number that will sum to give me 1x. Now, a clue here, whenever the sum, the numbers you're looking that are going to combine, is a 1 or a -1, that's a clue that your factors are going to be right next to each other. They're going to be consecutive. But let's list them just to see. Now, in order to get a negative, I know my signs have to be opposite. So my factors here, one will be negative, one will be positive, and the bigger factor gets the sign of the middle, and my middle's positive. So my smaller factor here is the negative. So -1 times positive 30 will give me the -30x squared. But when I add it, it's 29. It's not 1. Let's try the next one. -2 and positive 15. That gives me 13. Still not what I need. -3 and positive 10. That gives me the -30, but it does not give me the 1. It gives me a 7. And then now, the one that's going to work, -5x times 6x gives me the positive 1x. Notice 5 and 6 are consecutive numbers. So this is a clue that whenever that sum is a 1, the 2 factors are going to be numbers that would be right next to each other. So now you're going to take those 2 factors. We're going to turn our trinomial into a 4-term polynomial. So we're going to rewrite the 2x squared. We're replacing the x with these two numbers I just found. So negative 5x, let me do it in black so it shows up, plus 6x, and then rewrite the last term, the negative 15. So now I need to make groups. So I can make a green group here, and I could make let's just make this one black. So the green group, my greatest common factor here is just x. So after I divide by x, I'm left with 2x minus 5. And then of my black group here, my GCF is going to be 3. So after you divide by 3, again, you're left with the same thing. If these two do not match, the answer is after you divide, you've done something wrong. So that's the first binomial, the one that's in common. And then take the two GCFs, x plus 3. And we're done. Yes. So notice this time, all three numbers can be divided by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and divide all 3 by 2. And now what remains is what I need to factor. So 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. 12x divided by 2 is 6x. And 18 divided by 2 is 9. Now I got the nice simple trinomial that I can factor here. Now, if you recognize that this is a perfect square and so is this, when it's a trinomial, a perfect square trinomial turns into a binomial squared. So this final answer, if you recognize that, is just going to be x plus 3 and x plus 3. Or you could write it as 2 times x plus 3 squared. Now, if you didn't recognize that, you can do it the longer way. So let's say we're at this point now with the 2, then the x squared plus 6x plus 9. So I'm looking for factors of 9 that sum to give me 6. So those factors would either be 1 and 9, which gives me 10, or 3 and 3, which gives me, the 6. So these are the two factors I need. So then you just take these two and put them right into the binomial. So either way is acceptable here. And again, you can also write it as x plus 3 squared. Now, what Big Ideas wanted you to do when this number in front of x squared is a negative, they want you to pull out a -1 GCF. So what we have to do here is divide everything by -1 first. Now, when you go to enter your answer, Big Ideas want you to just put the negative sign, not enter it as a -1. Now that I've pulled out the GCF, now I'm going to do my factor by grouping. So now I'm going to multiply the beginning and the end. This gives me -30x squared. So I'm looking for two factors that multiply to give me that, but who will add to give me the -1x. Again, just like before, we saw that when this sum is a 1 or a -1, my factors are side by side. Now, you're going to get really good at this next year, where you're going to be able to look at this and you're going to know the factors automatic. And you won't have to go through the entire listing. Some of you are probably already good at it now because you're really good with your times tables. But if not, take the time, make the organized list. So again, signs are different, and the sign that the bigger factor is going to be the sign of the middle. And my middle term is negative. So it'll be 1x times -30x. This gives me the product I need, but when I add it, it's not the right sum. Then if I do 2x and -15x, that gives me the -30x squared, but when I add it, Still not the right sum. 3 is also a factor, 3 and negative 10, but that gives me negative 7. Finally, once I do 5x and negative 6x, this gives me the combination that I need. So I'm going to replace this middle term, that negative x, with those two factors. So we're going to rewrite, and again, big ideas wants it just as a negative sign. I'm going to rewrite the first term. I'm replacing that negative x with the two factors I just found. Doesn't matter the order you put them in. And then I'm rewriting the negative 10. So now I need to make my groups. So I can make a blue group here, and I can make a purple group. So now my GCF of blue is going to be 3x. And again, you always want to make sure your x term in the binomial is positive. Yes, you can FOIL it with a negative, but again, we need to get into the habit of keeping the x terms positive. And then divide out a 5, GCF, and then again, left with the same answer when you divide it. So notice these are the same. You write that down. We still also have the negative sign in front, and then you're also going to group the GCFs to create the second binomial. And again, the order that you write them, remember, doesn't matter. You could have put the 3x plus 5 first, and then the x minus 2 second. Remember, you can multiply these three things back. If it doesn't go back to the original problem, then you've done something wrong. When you go to multiply these back, you can either choose to FOIL these two first and then distribute the negative 1, or distribute the negative 1 into this one and then FOIL it with what's there. Because remember, multiplication is commutative. The order doesn't matter. Binomials. Remember, when we factored these back on day 1, the only time we could factor a binomial is when it was the difference of two squares. And at first glance, you're going to look at this and you're going to say, wait a minute, 3 and 48 aren't perfect squares. However, I can divide both numbers by 3, and then what remains are perfect squares. So if I divide this by 3 and this by 3, then I'm left with x squared minus 16. Now, in the parentheses, is the difference of two squares. So now all I have to do is square root the x squared and square root the 16. And remember, when you factor this, it ends up being 1 with a plus sign and 1 with a minus sign. So minus 4 and plus 4. And again, the order doesn't matter here. If you would have put 3 and then the x plus 4 first and the x minus 4 second, it doesn't matter. But you need to remember to include that GCF in the front. Because again, if you were to multiply these three things back, it will go back to the beginning. Now the next one, you may look at it and say, wait a minute, 4x squared and 144, they're both perfect squares. However, and this is going to be the wrong way, if you just square root these and get 2x minus 12 and 2x plus 12, you would get it wrong because there is still a GCF hiding in here. So what we need to do first is take and always look for the greatest common factor first. My GCF here between 4 and 144 is 4. So I'm going to divide both of them by 4 first. And what remains is now still the difference of two squares, and I can factor that. I'll square root the x squared, square root the 36. This ends up giving me x minus 6 and x plus 6. Remember, when you factor the difference of two squares, the signs are opposite. Because when you FOIL that, that middle term cancels out. So again, you're not going to be told, wait, this one has a GCF. The instructions are just going to say factor. So you always need to look for a greatest common factor first. And this one has a GCF. I can divide all three terms by 3. So once I divide all 3 by 3, what remains is now a nice simple trinomial that I can factor. So I'm again going back to the day 1 where I'm looking for the factors of that 6 that sum to give me the middle. Now, you can also do the grouping here, but again, when it's got a 1 in front of x squared, don't worry about doing the grouping. Just look for factors of that C term, that last term. So let's look at them. I've got 1 times 6. Well, that gives me 7. And there's my group. I don't need to go any further. So then put the GCF, and then the x plus 1, and the x plus 6. And we're done. And again, it wouldn't matter if you write the x plus 6 first, and then the x plus 1 second. But again, that 3 that you divided from the beginning needs to be in the front. Next one also has a GCF. I can divide 10, 25, and 15. I can divide all 3 of these by 5. My greatest common factor here is a 5. So we're going to divide, put the GCF on the outside. 10x squared divided by 5 is 2x squared. 25 divided by 5 is 5x, and it's negative. And then finally, positive 15 divided by 5 is positive 3. So now I have a trinomial. It's the more challenging one. So at this point, you can either factor what is in the parentheses by guessing and testing, or trial and error, or factor by grouping. Again, I'm going to do the grouping. So I'm going to multiply the beginning and the end. So I am looking for factors of 6x squared that when I add them, the sum is negative 5x. So my factors here are negative 1. The signs have to be the same because it's a positive 6. And the signs they're both going to have is the sign of the middle. So negative 1 and negative 6 will give me the positive 6x squared. But when I add them, negative 7. Not what I need. So I'll go to the next group of factors, negative 2x and negative 3x. And when I add that, this is the sum that I need. So again, we're replacing the middle term with these two factors. Don't forget about that GCF. So rewrite the first term, replace that middle with the two numbers you just found, and rewrite the last term. Yes. So I can make a blue group here, and I can make a red group. So my greatest common factor of my blue group is going to be 2x. So I'm going to divide. I'm going to get x minus 1. GCF of red, if you pull out a positive 3, your signs are going to be off. So you need to pull out a negative 3 so that these two match up. By pulling out a positive 3, they won't match. So now take the original GCF, take the match, and then take the two GCFs, and they become the last binomial. Again, if you have time, you should always FOIL the binomials that you get. And if it had a GCF, distribute that GCF back in. All right, this one, again, always look, is there a GCF? No, there's not. So this is actually the day 2 assignment where we're just gonna factor by grouping. So we can't divide out anything, so let's just multiply. Negative 30x squared. These are the factors I'm looking for. That will sum to give me 13. So signs need to be different to get a negative 30. So, and the bigger factor will be the middle sign, which is positive. So negative 1x times positive 30x gives me the negative 30x squared. But when I add them, I get 29, not 13. So then if I do negative 2x and then 15x, this will give me what I need. So this is going to replace the middle. So rewrite the first term. Replace negative 2x, positive 15x, and then rewrite the last number. So now factor by grouping. Let's do a black group, and I'll do a white group here so it shows up. So GCF here is x. 5x minus 2 remains. GCF of this group is 3. And again, I get the 5x minus 2. So no GCF was in the front, so I just have the x plus the 5x minus 2 and the x plus 3. And again, the order doesn't matter. The next one, notice I cannot divide by a GCF here. So again, it's just day 2 homework again. I'm just going to factor by grouping. So multiply. So factors of 33x squared that are going to sum to the middle, which is 34x. Never overlook the obvious, the very first one. So this is just 1x times 33x, because that'll give me the 34x. So sometimes it's that easy. So now, we can't just put it right into the binomial. We have to factor by grouping. So rewrite the first term. Replace the middle with the 2 numbers I just found. Doesn't matter the order you put them in. And now we'll make our groups. So green. And I'll just do black here. So GCF of green is x. You're left with 3x plus 1. GCF of the black group will be 11. And now we're left with 3x plus 1. So again, this is the same. So you write that down. And then group the 2 GCFs. Again, you can always FOIL it. If it doesn't go back to the original problem, you've done something wrong. Next one. Notice this one. They're all divisible by 2. So my GCF here is going to be a 2. So I'm going to divide them all by 2. And then I'm left with x squared minus 10x plus 25. Now, again, if you're good at recognizing that this is a perfect square trinomial, then all you would have to do is square root this, and it goes right to your answer. X minus 5, x minus 5, or 2 times x minus 5 squared. Now, if you didn't recognize that, then what you could also do is find 2 factors. So we're looking for the factors of 25, the C term, that sum to give you negative 10. So those factors of 25, they both would need to be negative. This gives me negative 26, but negative 5 and negative 5 give me the negative 10. So that's how I could go right in to the 2 binomials with the 2 negative 5s. And then the last one, The only GCF that I can pull out of this one is a -1. So I'm going to divide them all by -1. And now I'm left with -1, 5x squared, plus 31x, plus 6. Now I factor by grouping. So I'm going to multiply the beginning and the end. So factors of 30x squared, that sum to give me 31x. And again, the nice and easy obvious. It's just going to be 1x times 30x, because 1 plus 30 gives me 31. So now rewrite. I'm just going to drop the -1 and just make it a negative sign, because that's what Big Ideas wants. And then now the 5x squared, replace the 31 with the two factors you just found, and then drop down the plus 6. And now we group, blue group and purple group. GCF of blue is just going to be an X. GCF of purple is going to be 6. And now, what's in common? The 5x plus 1 is the first binomial with that negative sign in front, and then group the two GCFs. And you're done. Again, you can always multiply this back. If it doesn't go back to the original problem, you've done something wrong.